why don't we just, take it from the top? And yeah, could you maybe just once again introduce yourself a little bit, and and we'll start again?
Okay. Yeah, just the Code of Silence, that's the name of my book that I'm writing. But we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Now, for myself then, I was chief at home for several years, and I was chief of the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations. And I got involved in our politics, in Indian Nations politics, at 15 years old. And the leaders and the elders took me, and I was advised early that you're going to make plans and strategies for us for the future, for the next 7 generations. How are you going to do that? They said, you have to know your history. You have to know our history, and you have to know their history. If you don't do that, you will make plans and strategies that cause barriers for the next generation. If you do it and you know it, then you'll make plans that they can build on. That's your responsibility as a leader. And as a young man, you're going to be making many plans and strategies that we need to put in place and implement, but they have to be designed and developed so that the next 7 generations can build on them. So the foundation has been laid. But just to give you an example of what we failed to do as Indians ourselves, we restructured the FSI Inc. from provincial corporate law to a federation of nations that the leaders and the elders and our people wanted. We restructured the Federation of Nations by a political agreement that we call a convention that's ratified by every the membership in every band. We traveled the province for 2.5 years to do it. Then we developed a Convention Act under our own laws and jurisdiction that govern the governing bodies of the Federation of Nations. But like AFN, I was there when we changed the AFN from the NIB. But do you realize it's 2022? AFN has never been implemented. Just take a look at it. They're still implementing NIB Inc. And they only have an administrative structure. They don't have the political organization implementation that we put in place for forming the Assembly of First Nations. Now, like FSIN today, the young leadership is implementing FSI Inc. under provincial corporate law, like NIB Inc. So we have problems ourselves, you see, recognizing our sovereignty and our status and our rights. Now, going into that whole area of my experience during the constitutional talks, everybody told me Section 35 is an empty box. And I kept saying, no, it's a full box. And you'll see why. So I spent 65 years in our Indian politics and still involved today. So let's start from the top, like you say. The Code of Silence is critical. Now, even with our own talks and discussions around treaties, we don't go into the historical status of how we made treaties. We talk about treaties and we jump right into treaty rights. Well, there's a whole major obligation we have to understand the national powers of treaty making. So how did we do that? Well, Judge Lammer, the late Judge Lammer from the Supreme Court said, what? He said, all your rights supersede everything. But I got 2 questions, he said. What are they and where do they come from? So when you examine the source of our inherent rights, where do they come from? Our inherent sovereignty of our nations, the national powers of governing we have, and the national powers of treaty making, the inherent rights by sector in education, health, justice, economics, lands, resources, so on, citizenship, membership, and all that. I'll cover that. But we also have inherent title to lands and resources. Now, where do they come from? They're granted to our nations and peoples by the Creator, not to one chief and council, not to one band. It's a collective responsibility that we have for all those inherent rights I'm talking about. and we enforce the collective responsibility, we also recognize the individual's rights and responsibility. It's not like their system. They have human rights, law that recognizes federally and nationally only individual rights. But when we look at our whole inherent rights, then I'm talking about your traditions, your customs, your beliefs, and your values that are there for implementation. And when we look at how do we do that? So under our inherent rights, our inherent sovereignty, and our inherent title to lands and resources, we have to define all those rights. And when I talk about the inherent rights, I'm talking about your inherent right to self-government and self-determination under your inherent sovereignty. Nobody else's sovereignty. It's your sovereignty, my sovereignty. It recognizes our national powers of governing, our national powers of treaty making, like I've said, and we all have those powers. But when we look at the national powers of treaty making, those are the powers of the membership of every community, not of the chief and council. So that's the political organizational governing structure I'm talking about that we have to implement based on our traditional systems of governing. We had highly structured kinship clan systems, as you know, with functions of government that are similar to what you call the democratic systems of governing. Non-Indians came here from dictatorships. They didn't come from democratic systems of governing, and they're still doing that, coming from dictatorships. And when you look at the process, then they studied our systems of the clan system long before the US did. The various countries sent delegations here to study our kinship clan system over 500 years ago. Now we had something else that's not dealt with. We had portfolios in the form of what? Highly structured and disciplined societies in every sector. The nice thing about those societies, they cross the boundaries of our nations. Give you one example. Our medicine society, that crossed the boundaries of every nation. They had a medicine society in their nations. And they used to meet annually at what they called neutral grounds for trading medicines and exchanging information about healing and preventive medicines and so on. And we have one site here in Saskatchewan. There's two sites really, but one is at Watrous, Saskatchewan, where the healing waters are. And you can still see the markings where they met annually on the neutral grounds for implementing the exchange of information through their medicine societies. And they regulated and controlled themselves. Well, that's just one example of the highly structured and disciplined societies I'm talking about. Well, where are they today? They still exist today, but are we implementing them? No. So we have destabilized governing systems, and I'll tell you why after. So when you look at the inherent rights then to education, to health, social development, lands and resources, inherent rights to justice, economics in the form of our own economy, we'll talk about that. And then you look at the inherent rights that we have to water and air. People used to laugh at me as a young leader when I talked about jurisdiction for airspace. Well, nobody's laughing anymore when you look at the environment and the environmental changes that are happening. But the Navajo nations lease out their airspace for communications and transportation, $80 million a year for access to their jurisdiction for airspace. And that's not new. When they built those towers in London, England, the two lords that owned most of those towers downtown London, they organized to rent out the airspace floor by floor, not the whole building. They implemented their jurisdiction for airspace floor by floor, and they entered into agreements renting that airspace to people using those offices and rooms. So it's not magic, you see. But what are we doing? We're living in treaty territory where we have inherent rights to jurisdiction over airspace. Well, those are the things that we're not doing under implementing our inherent rights and treaties and treaty rights. But then you go on to look at your citizenship and membership now. You see, that's pretty critical today. We're still losing families now, not just one Indian at a time. I got 4 Chapmans that are registered as Indians, but no benefits or rights because of Bill C-31. So after 6-2, they're registered as Indians under the Indian Act with no benefits or rights. And the other part of the Indian Act, you're registered as an Indian with full benefits and rights. Like, what the hell are we doing? Where's our own Citizenship Act and membership codes? Our own Citizenship Act recognizing as citizens of our nations, our membership codes recognizing our membership of our respective bands. And we don't deal with the historical process we had of dual citizenship status. Why? That's our jurisdiction. So you see, when we talk about the citizenship and membership now, people don't even recognize today that Section 35(2) recognizes what? Recognizes Indian, Métis, and Inuit. In what form? It's a constitutional recognition, not an Indian Act membership recognition. That's a constitutional recognition. So Sol Sanderson, the Cree from Chigasy Band of the Cree Nation, will be registered under our own Cree Citizenship Act and our membership code, so being a member of the Chigasy Band of the Cree Nation. So I'm already certified and registered with full status of what I'm talking about, of my inherent status, inherent rights. Now we've got treaties and treaty rights. So then when I look at the Section 35(2) of the Constitution Act of 1982, recognizing Indian constitutional status, well, that gives Sol Sanderson now dual citizenship status under Canadian Constitution, Section 35(2). Now, what are we doing? We're not dealing with that stuff. We're not dealing with those issues. Why? That's what the framework is all about. And I'll tell you about the constitutional political framework that governs Crown Indian Nations relations in a moment. So when we go on to look at those and listing all those inherent rights that we have, including the inherent right to hunt, fish, trap, and gather, granted to our nations and our peoples by the Creator, what we're doing is we're allowing the provincial governments, the federal government, and their courts to not just identify them, but define them. Like your statement earlier about Joe Wild's position. Joe Wild can go to hell. He has no jurisdiction at all over our inherent sovereignty, inherent rights and status, and our governing powers and our inherent title to lands and resources. But he doesn't even know that. Yet he's a so-called expert as a senior ADM of Crown Indigenous Services and Crown Indigenous Relations. So never mind Joe Wild for a while, but I won't mention him again. But when you look at people like that, there's all kinds of them around that don't understand the constitutional arrangements since 1982. And when you look at the process then of identifying all our inherent rights, our inherent title to lands and resources, our inherent sovereignty, how did we exercise the national powers of treaty making? Well, they're all recognized, they're all reserved, they're all confirmed, and they're all guaranteed by treaties and treaty making. Now, see, do we go there in terms of talking about treaty rights and treaty relations? No, we don't. Why? That's our jurisdiction and responsibility. So now you have them identified, and it's our duty to define them. How? In our or the language of our own nations. How? Under our traditions, customs, beliefs, practices, and values. And they impact every one of our nations that we're talking about. Now you see, that's an AFN agenda, not a NIB Inc. agenda. That's a Federation of Nations agenda, and not a FSI Inc. agenda. And what I'm giving you right now is what you call a political agenda. And we're so engaged in administrative agendas So 85% of our leadership's agendas at every level is tied to administrative agendas. Very little about what I'm talking about, a political agenda that we're going through right now. So when you look at that whole process then of identifying them and defining them in our respective languages, then what are we doing to identify the duties and responsibilities that we have collectively for every one of those inherent rights, our inherent sovereignty, our inherent title to lands and resources? Where's our laws and jurisdiction being asserted and implemented? There's nothing, you see. People are trying to make laws under Indigenous status and Aboriginal status. That does nothing to firm up and identify clearly who we are and what we need to do. So historically, the elders used to tell us what the duties and responsibilities are for our inherent rights, our special rights and status. But we're not even doing that anymore. We have colleges and we have schools, and we're not even teaching that in our schools and never mind our homes. So that's how bad it is in terms of how we've forgotten who we are and where we're going. So then you look at the duties and responsibilities associated with every one of those inherent rights that are reserved, recognized, confirmed, and guaranteed by treaty. What are your plans and strategies to implement your inherent right to education, your inherent right to health, inherent right to justice, economics, and lands and resources, and so on? All those ones that I've listed. What are your plans and strategies to implement them? When you know the plans and strategies, what kind of laws do you construct to implement them? Well, you need special and unique forms of law under our government jurisdiction and law. How? Under our government jurisdiction and our inherent legal system. Now, that's where there's a lot of resistance amongst our own people, is to implement our inherent legal system that mandates how we govern ourselves and how we put in place our jurisdiction. Why? They're trying to implement our jurisdiction under the English common law system. Well, that's still not our government. That's not our jurisdiction. That's Canada's jurisdiction. And Quebec has the civil code, which is French law. So I'll talk about how that impacts on what we need to do. So now you see, I've given you a history of who you are and who I am. Without that knowledge, you can't implement the spirit and intent of treaty, because implementing the spirit and intent of treaty means that you have to give legal effect to all those things I'm talking about that we had and we still have through the national powers of treaty making. Now we have treaties and treaty rights as well. So combining the treaty rights, give you an example, the inherent right and treaty right to education is total education. It's a whole circle of 4 directions and total education that we have. So for example, today, everybody's buying into Joe Wild's concept of creating education districts with Indians on the board, but still incorporated under provincial law and jurisdiction. He's calling that education self-government. Like hell it is. We need our own, if we're going to implement the inherent rights and treaty rights to education, then where is our inherent right and treaty right to education? Education Act, under our own laws and jurisdiction. So even when you budget today, the budgeting is done by calculating the cost to run a school and find funding for post-secondary ed for students graduating from your school. Well, that's not a budget. When you budget for post-secondary ed, that's inherent rights and treaty rights to skills, trades, and professional education. Every sector has to budget for those education costs, not just education. What do you think they do for their human resource developments? They access funding for their trades, skills, and professional development through education and training in every department, nationally and provincially. Well, if they can do that, we can do it, and we have to do it because we're short funding all the time. But that's because we're not budgeting right. So now some people are looking at budgeting for what they call treaty-based funding. Well, treaty-based funding is okay, but you'll only have half your budget because you're not budgeting for the inherent rights I just talked about. Why aren't you? That's your responsibility. That's who we are. That's our identity. And that's our status. But now we also have treaty and treaty rights benefits and status. So that's just some of the background that you need to have in terms of moving forward on how we do budgeting and how we implement our own form of government. So now we have treaties and treaty rights. So implementing the spirit and intent of treaty then, like I gave you the example, you implement the inherent right and treaty right to education under our own laws and jurisdiction through an act. And how do you do it? Well, you set up a traditional contemporary education system. The traditional education system will look at all our knowledge of how we've done teachings and education. And we have highly skilled professional education training under our own systems, under our own traditions, customs, practice, beliefs, and values. But again, we're not going there. Some are now starting to go there. And when the AFN called me in to deal with the issue of financing for language, I sat and listened to everybody for about half a day. In the afternoon, I said, look, you're not talking about how to finance our systems of language properly. I said, yes, it's great. We're going to get money in the schools to teach our languages. But they spend billions on providing funding for them to be able to use English governing systems. Why in the hell can't we get the same type of funding for using our language in our governing systems? We're entitled to the same thing. So that act doesn't go far enough, I said. It has to include funding that's made available for conducting our governing business in our own language like they do using French and English. But that's a hell of a high cost for them because they're doing it at every level of government. So like, where are we? Where are we coming from? Yeah, it's great that we got money now for teaching the language in our schools, but that has to go further than that. Now, looking at the process, you see, of implementing the inherent rights and treaty rights to education again. So when you're teaching your language in your school, what's wrong with teaching what I talked about just a while ago about what our inherent sovereignty is, what our inherent rights are, and what our inherent title lands and resources? My late sister-in-law was teaching grade 11 and 12, and she said, Sol, I want to talk to you and Elsie, my wife. We developed a module for how you teach inherent rights. I want to use it, she said. I'm going to teach it while I'm teaching Cree. And you should have saw the papers those grade 12 students wrote. University students couldn't even come close to writing that same kind of a paper. But those are the things that we can do to implement what I'm talking about and how we do it. So then you get back to the whole process then of implementing your national powers of treaty making. You see, that's what the national powers of treaty making are. You need to know what your inherent rights are, what your inherent sovereignty is, what your inherent title to lands and resources are, because they're reserved, recognized, confirmed, and guaranteed by treaty. And you're going to hear me repeat that steady, because that's part of the code of silence, eh? Like Joe Wild saying that they can amend the laws to terminate our status and our rights like hell he can. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to use his name again, but he's a nuisance. He's a Harper man.
Yeah.
And the late, the Warnick clerk of Privy Council, that's who he answered to. So we had a big gap for a while when Warnick got left, terminated as a clerk of Privy Council. But I'm pretty sure he's still around. Anyway, going on with the whole process then. So we now have the inherent rights, inherent title to lands and resources. We have our sovereignty, our national powers of governing, our national powers of treaty making, and we have our continued Crown Indigenous Indian nations treaty relations process. So when I met with the late Judge Dixon during the patriation issue, I met him several times. He said, Chief, he said, never let them leave out the Royal Proclamation of 1763. He said, here's why. He said, here's my interpretation of this Royal Proclamation of 1763. It's royal instructions from the Crown and the British government to us in the form of a Bill of Rights. Now, it's our Bill of Rights, not yours. It's our Bill of Rights under our laws and jurisdiction under that proclamation. And it provides for recognizing the sovereignty of your nations, the national powers of your governments, the national powers of treaty making, continues to apply this Crown Indian Nations treaty relations, and it recognizes all your inherent rights. But more important, he said, it recognizes your inherent title to lands and resources. So never let them leave it out of the Constitution. So Section 25(2) recognizes the Royal Proclamation today. Do we use it? No, we don't use it. Now you see, if the government officials, including the lawyers that I've talked with several times, they don't go there either. So now we have the UN Declaration that's ratified by law, Bill C-15, that makes that binding legal responsibility applied to every ministry and every department, not just departments that are dealing with Crown Indigenous services and Crown Indigenous relations. That applies to every department. But we have something else under the Constitution. Section 35 recognizes everything I've just talked about, everything. Now, do we go there? No, we don't. But Section 35 does something else now. And that's what the lawyers are struggling with. Section 35 now takes over all the authority and jurisdiction of the feds under Section 9124 powers of the federal government for Indians and Indian lands in a major way. But it does another thing. All these powers under the BNA Act, Section 92 provincial powers, now become federal powers and jurisdiction in respect to Crown Indian Nations relations. So the feds have no excuse of not making laws that carries out their legal, fiscal, jurisdictional responsibility in every sector, recognizing the inherent rights and treaty rights to under their responsibility legally, politically, financially, and trust relationships. Now we have our own people opposing federal legislation. Well, how in the hell do you implement a treaty if you don't have laws in place that implement them? So both parties to the treaty have to give them legal effect under their government jurisdiction law. And in doing that, then you also legislate at the same time the inherent rights and treaty rights that we have based on the framework I'm talking about. So Section 35 is a major, but we don't even know how to apply it as far as I'm concerned. And talking to many of our people, they don't even go there. But the non-Indian lawyers have been coming to me about what does Section 35 provide for? Well, that's a pretty major recognition, is it not? That's why I've just given you a whole detail of information on why Section 35 is a damn full box. And when I was in London, England, by myself there for a few weeks, I met with the law lords, a committee of law lords. The first issue came up, Section 35 is a full box, empty box. I said, who in the hell passed the Royal Proclamation of 1763? Did you not do it here in your own government? They said, yes. Well, what is the Royal Proclamation all about? So I told them what it's about. And they agreed it. I was right, you see. Then I filled them in on what the inherent rights are, just like I just finished telling you. Now I said, you're telling me it's an empty box? Like hell, it's an empty box. Because we all have all those inherent rights and recognized, but now we have treaties and treaty rights that are international treaties that we made with your government and the Crown. but both parties have to give them legal effect. I said, now what I want to know is what kind of law you use to transfer the Crown and right of Ireland and England's treaty responsibilities to the Crown and right of Canada. The chairman said, we have no law. Well, you had to do it somehow. I said, under your process of legal political recognition. Oh yes, he said, we have what we call the Novation of the Crown theory. He said, that's how we transfer the Crown of England and Ireland's treaty responsibilities and treaties to the Crown and right of Canada, to the Crown and right of New Zealand, to the Crown and right of Australia, and so on. There's no law, he said. Well, I said, we still have to deal with some of the outstanding business and treaty, because we're not dealing with the international status of our treaties in a proper manner. So we have to give them legal effect, and you have to give them legal effect. Now in Canada, and then I went to got a meeting with the Foreign Affairs Committee of Cabinet. Same thing, same question came up. So I told them the same thing I told the law lords, and then they agreed. And the chairman says, what do you want us to do? I said, what the hell do you mean? What do you want to do? What I want you to do? You know what you have to do. Because if you pass that Canada Act in your parliament here without Section 35, you'll have created a major liability against the Crown. But it wouldn't be a liability against the Crown and right of Canada. It'll be a liability against the Crown of England and Ireland. And it's a major liability. Okay, they said, he said, we'll phone the Prime Minister in the morning. Section 35 will stay intact. But you see, that's stuff that people don't know about, of the kind of work I've done. But Section 35 is intact, and I gave you all the information on what it's about and how it has to be implemented. Now we have the Act 15 that implements the UN declaration, but we also have the Organization of American States Declaration, and Canada belongs to that organization. Why aren't we using that as well? Again, it's because we don't know. Our people don't know. And of course, the national people dealing with our issues don't know either. When Trudeau set up the law review process, they created a law review secretariat in 4 areas, one in Privy Council, one in INAC, one in finance, and one in justice. So they had 4 secretariats. And the lady that was in charge from Privy Council called me one day. She said, we want to talk with you. We're going to need about 3 hours of discussions with you. We want you to keep coming here and talking about special and unique laws that we have to make, and the special and unique laws that you have to make. So we want to know what you're talking about and how we should be doing it. I said, okay. They linked up all the 4 secretariats. And I said, let's take the most sensitive one to you and me. It's called taxation. I said, for any one of you that know what tax immunity is, let me know now. Not one knew anything about what tax immunity is all about. But yet, that's critical. Why do we have tax immunity? It's because we have sovereignty and because we have international treaties. Why do we have tax exemption? It's because the treaties and inherent rights provide for goods and services in every sector at the cost of the Crown, not at the cost of Indian nations and our governments and our people, but it also provides for tax exemption because of the socioeconomic benefits under treaty. The Indian Act one, of course, is tax exemption on the reserve. So it's like you fall off the edge of the reserve and you lose all your rights and benefits. Well, Section 35 now applies that whole thing. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the portability of your status. I'm talking about the portability of your inherent rights, treaties, and treaty rights. How? Between communities, between our communities, between the non-Indian communities. It applies regionally, nationally, internationally. So the tax exemption then applies at all levels. And yes, we need our own tax regime. And we better make damn sure we build in the tax immunity and the tax exemptions. But we will have to have identification of taxation. We had it historically, like the trades and goods that we've done between each other. That's a form of tax, or a tariff, if you want to call it that. But we did do it historically. So we need to talk about how we develop our own tax regime and set up our own tax laws and assert our jurisdiction. So, and I said, okay, the next one we'll take then is membership. You want to do away with the Indian Act? Go ahead, I said, do away with the Indian Act. Because I already told you who Sol Sanderson is and how I'm going to be certified and registered under our own Cree Citizenship Act and our own membership code. But under what you've done, I said, you've done something else. He said, what did we do now? I said, you now have section 35(2) that recognize Indians, Métis, and Inuit. And you recognize a constitutional recognition of Sol Sanderson as an Indian with dual citizenship status under your constitution and now under your laws. So yeah, do away with the Indian Act membership, but you have to amend your Citizenship Act to recognize everything that I'm talking about, so that Sol Sanderson is still registered under federal jurisdiction law, but recognizing our jurisdictional law for Sol Sanderson and his dual citizenship status as a Canadian with full benefits and rights. Now, you see, we went on like that for 3 hours in different areas of how they legislated now the Land Management Act and the privatization of Indian reserve lands under their jurisdiction law. Well, where the hell's our inherent title to Lands and Resource Act that applies not just on the reserve by community, but throughout our whole traditional lands and resource territory? We're still talking about federal law. Well, immediately after they made treaties, we reserved our inherent title to lands and resources, like I told you, by under our inherent rights. And they're reserved, recognized, and confirmed and guaranteed by treaty. How? Well, the sovereignty of our nations remains intact in the title to all lands and resources. But again, you see, we don't go there. We talk about losing our lands and resources under the Indian Act and under federal provincial law. Well, where in the hell is our laws and jurisdiction applying our jurisdiction for our title to lands and resources throughout our whole territory, ancestral traditional territories? And yes, they'll overlap because the treaties overlap our traditional lands and resource territory. But we should be mature enough to be able to sit down and do like we did historically on how we share those lands and resources, respecting the use of them and occupation of them for hunting, fishing, trapping, and gathering, and for other purposes, economic, social purposes. So we don't go there, you see. So I'm still on the political agenda. I'm not taking you into any administrative agendas. I don't have time for that. That's been the story of my life. I've pushed the political agenda every opportunity I got. So I'm still doing it today. So now, you see, you have all that recognition that we keep talking about what we want to have recognized, but at the same time, we're rejecting it. I laughed at Treaty 6 here about 6 months ago. They met in Alberta, a number of the chiefs, and they sent me the information that they dealt with. They were opposing the federal legislation for the treaty right to health. I said, and that's all they talked about. But they didn't talk about what they're doing. And what are they doing? They're implementing provincial law and jurisdiction right on our reserves and our people, not just here in Saskatchewan, but nationally. And that applies as well to child welfare, education, health, social development, economics, all these little corporate entities we've set up under provincial corporate law or federal corporate law. Those are not under our jurisdiction. They sign away their powers of governing as soon as they do that under provincial jurisdiction law or federal jurisdiction law. Not saying we don't need our own corporations, but we need our own Corporations Act and identify our governing systems properly so that we have departments of education, departments of finance and revenue, and we're still implementing programs like that. Indian Affairs put that in place in 1960. Here it is 2022, and we're still implementing the same stuff. Why? No reason for it. We need to get our act together and develop our own laws in every sector and establish our own departments and our new institutions for governing in every sector. So we're even afraid to delegate responsibility from the band level to the next tribal council level or treaty area level. But yet we can buy into the second level under provincial law and jurisdiction. See what I'm talking about? Right. So the federal government, I told Bennett, Minister Bennett, and again, Joe Wild in Edmonton prior to an assembly, AFN assembly. I said, look, look, all those laws you're passing, the Land Management Act, the Finance Administration Act, all those laws you've made, they're under Section 9124 of the BNA Act. I said, you're doing that to restrict the application, the major application under Section 35. And I said, that has to change because that's illegal now. And here's why. So I told them why. And Bennett agreed with me. So when they passed the Child Welfare Act, she come looking for me in Ottawa at an AFN meeting. And she said, oh, here you are. She said, we heard you. She said, we finally done it. She said, we've given legal effect to Section 35 under the Child Welfare Act. Oh, Minister, I said, you've done more than that. What did we do now? She said, I said, well, you've implemented the UN Declaration as well. Oh, yes, he said, we have. She said, now I said, just one example of what I was talking about in Edmonton to you and Joe Wild. But you have to legislate like that in every sector. Well, that's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. She said, we need to do that. I agree, we need to do that. But I said, it applies on every federal department and agency now and every federal ministry, because Section 35 does. Not like Section 20, Section 1924, what the BNA Act section anyway. When we look at that process, and you see, that's a pretty major application federally. So when I'm talking about your budgeting, you see, right now the contribution agreements, like I said, is providing money from Crown Indigenous Services when they only have 15% of the budget nationally. And the major funding is in other federal departments and agencies. I'll give you an example, child welfare. In Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Thunder Bay, Ontario, I sat listening to lawyers, lawyers and consultants and chiefs, leaders, saying there's no money in child welfare. So every time I'd get up, I said, what do you mean there's no money in child welfare? There's child welfare funding in the new legislation that's passed, Bill C-92. There's O&M and capital. Jordan's Principle has O&M and capital. And Crown Indigenous Services has O&M and capital in social development. But the major funding that you're not getting is the federal transfer of funding that goes from the feds to the provinces for child welfare. The provinces don't put any money into Indian child welfare. That's all federal money transferred to them under that social transfer. So I said, now I've given you 4 major sources of funding for child welfare. What do you mean you don't have access to funding? You don't have it because you have the contribution agreement that restricts you to Crown Indigenous Services funding only. Section 35, as it provides you access to all federal departments and agencies to access funding for child welfare. So what are you doing? So the other thing that we're doing, and I said that I headed up the Medicine Task Force in Treaty 6, and we soon learned that we had to include social services because of the overlapping jurisdictional fiscal issues in health and social development that caused the gaps that we have because of the overlapping jurisdiction fiscal issues, just federally, never mind between the feds and the province. But we designed our own federal First Nation social safety net between our nations and the federal government, with the funding being transferred directly to our governments and bypassing the provinces. So I developed a chart on that whole process, but also developed a chart on the transition process of how it would happen for implementation. And there's 4 parts to it. There's the health sector that includes funding for hospitals, Medicare, dentist, optometrist care, levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 care, and special needs. Social development sector, it's child welfare funding, home care, elders care, levels 1, 2, 3, 4 care, and special needs. Now that's where the overlapping jurisdictional fiscal issues come into play. Now, the other part of it is part 3 is post-secondary education funding. Millions, billions of dollars being transferred to provinces to finance their colleges and universities. Well, our inherent rights and treaties provide for post-secondary institutions like schools from K to 12. We're entitled to funding to put in place and build our own colleges, university system. The other day I was at a meeting. There's struggles to implement universities across Canada, in different parts of Canada. I said, well, I think it's time we formed a coalition of our universities and applied our own jurisdiction laws, our own curriculum and certification and everything. What's wrong with that? Nothing. So it's like those acts I was talking about. They passed the Finance Administration Act federally. In the FSIN, we have 74 bands. 44 of them bought into that Finance Administration Act. And I said, what the hell are you doing? Why can't we have our own Finance Administration Act that applies to every band by community, tribal council, treaty area, and organizations like FSIN, AFN? What's your problem? You see? Why aren't we doing it? Because as soon as we sign under that Finance Administration Act federally, again, you lost your jurisdiction and your powers over fiscal relations and financing. So tell me, what's the problem? Why can't we come together on that political agenda to occupy the field with our own Finance Administration Act under our own terms and conditions, occupying the full field of fiscal relations and financing, and implementing our own model for budgeting and financing? So those are the things that are not being done. The how is missing, like I'm talking about here. So when you look at the other code of silence that's there, people don't understand what the comprehensive legal political framework is and that exists governing Crown Indian nations relations today. Let's walk through it. First of all, we have inherent sovereignty. The Crown has assumed sovereignty. Now, some people say that's Sol Sanderson's words. Those aren't Sol Sanderson's words. That's a Supreme Court decision of their own court declaring the Crown's assumed sovereignty. Why? Because silence again. It's because they have the international treaties with us. That's why they have assumed sovereignty. And that's some of the work they have to do. And they're trying to do it now in building their new institutions, structures of their governments and parliament. And I told them that after 1982, you need new institutions and structures of parliament and your government. But we too, as nations, we need new institutions of our nations and governments. Are we doing it? No. We're tearing down what we built. What are we doing? So then you look at that whole process, you see, implementing our inherent sovereignty, and the Crown's assumed sovereignty in terms of our sovereignty treaty relations between the Crown and Indian nations. All our inherents govern that framework, inherent rights and status, and our inherent sovereignty. and our international treaties govern that framework. So we took Treaty 6 to the UN through the Hobima chiefs and elders, and the UN declared Treaty 6 as being an international treaty. So that makes treaties 1 to 11 international treaties. But again, when we look at the treaties 1 to 11, people don't realize that that's one major treaty between the Crown and Indian nations. And you tie all that together, just the text of the treaties themselves, that's a hell of a major treaty. Now that gives you some understanding why Canada's reluctant to give it legal effect under their jurisdiction laws, because that's a major treaty when you look at it. But we're not even doing it. We haven't given legal effect to our treaties either. Under our laws and jurisdiction, neither has the Crown's representative, which is now the Crown in right of Canada, represented by the federal government, because of the novation of the Crown theory of transferring that responsibility from the Crown in right of England and Ireland to the Crown in right of Canada. But yet, that's a responsibility. If we want to maintain the status of our international status of our treaties, we have to do it. So looking at that process of moving forward on that framework, I've given you now the details of Section 35 under the Constitution Act of Canada now that applies and recognizes that one of the instruments that recognizes that framework of Crown Indian Nations relations. And now we have Bill C-15, recognizing the UN declaration under their jurisdiction laws. But how do we implement it? Well, I told you right from the start, we identify all our inherent rights, we interpret them, we identify the duties and responsibilities, we identify the plans and strategies, and construct the unique and special laws. That's how we implement the UN declaration under our sovereignty and our jurisdiction. Are we doing it? No, we're not. So we keep complaining, you see, but everything that I'm talking about is recognized, because the framework now between Crown Indian Nations relations is also governed by the UN Declaration and the Organization of American States Declaration, still applying the international conventions, the Child's Convention, the recognition of the child's benefits and rights and status under the International Convention. That still applies. The political convention recognizing the status of the sovereignty of nations with the criteria that's there. We meet all that criteria under that convention for the recognition of our sovereignty of our nations. So that's a pretty broad recognition, you see, a pretty broad legal political framework governing Crown Indian Nations relations. But again, you see, that's a political agenda. So if you've gone to any assemblies in your own region or nationally and heard that discussion or these discussions I'm having with you now, no, we don't. It's all discussions on administrative arrangements and issues. When do we get to the political agenda that I'm talking about? If we're serious about implementing our sovereignty. So then you go down and look at what's recognized in terms of relationships under that comprehensive framework. What are they? Well, you hear a lot about treaty relations, eh? Treaty relations, treaty relations, treaty relations. Well, that framework recognizes a hell of a lot more than just treaty relations. First of all, it recognizes political relations. In what form? The equality of government, jurisdiction, law, and courts. And are we implementing that? No, we're not. And yet we're signing self-government agreements that form municipal type governments and entering into the land management agreements that form federal municipal status for our reserve lands. Now, today, why are we doing all that when our sovereignty remains intact, entitled to all those lands and resources? So when you look at the process then of moving forward on government to government relationships in the form of equality of government, jurisdiction, and law, go across the border. You have tribal, state, and federal equality of government, jurisdiction, law, and courts just across the border. But the interface of jurisdiction and law already exists here in Canada. the French Civil Code in Quebec, French law implemented by the Quebec government, the English common law implemented across Canada for everybody, including us. Well, where's our law? Like I said, where's our inherent legal system? So I'm saying that they have to move and get the hell out of the way in terms of us applying our own form of law. So when I talk about the inherent legal system of the Cree Nation, I'm talking about the Cree laws of the Dene Nation, the Dene laws. Those types of things are our inherent legal system. But again, are we doing that? No, we're not doing that. Why? That's what's required if we're going to function as a nation and say we have inherent rights and status and treaties and treaty rights. So that's another matter that we have to address in terms of the equality of government jurisdiction, law, and courts for implementation and enforcement, but not just between the federal government and us or the provincial government and us. It's between our own governments of our nations. That's where we're weak. That's what the AFN was set up to do, was to identify how we implement the political agenda in every nation and how we interface with our jurisdictional laws applying in our own nations and our own communities. Have we gone there? No. Yeah, we talk about programs and services in every assembly, how they apply to all our nations and our communities and people, but we never go to the jurisdiction and laws that we have to discuss implementing all of them. So now we look at the ongoing process of relationships. I've given you enough information now about what treaty relations are all about and how we need to give legal effect to inherent rights treaties and treaty rights under our own government's jurisdiction laws. But judicial relations, you know, we keep complaining about what the courts are doing and what the justice systems are doing to our people federally and provincially. Well, that framework I just gave you, the inherent rights I just identified was for you, and the treaties that we have provide for the recognition of our own inherent justice system, our inherent legal system. Why aren't we doing it? That's the national powers of governing that I'm talking about, that we all have, every nation has, all our people have. What are we afraid of? If we can continue applying provincial law and jurisdiction that we're doing now in every sector, education, health, social development, what the hell's wrong with us occupying the field of in every sector under our own government's jurisdiction law, enforced by our own justice system and our own courts if we have to, but our own tribunals. And we look at that process, then that comes into play the issue that I keep talking about. Are we dealing with the interface of government jurisdiction and law? No, we're not. Those agreements for self-government are not going there at all. So they're still not implementing their own government jurisdiction laws. Now we have to go there. And when I talk about the interface of jurisdiction law, I'm talking internally of the governments of our nations by nation, between bands of the nations and the governments of the nations, then between our nations. Why aren't we going there? What are we doing? You see, we're doing nothing. So when we go on then to look at the relationships, where's our own economy? That's portable, community, regionally, nationally, internationally. I developed a comprehensive chart on implementing our own inherent rights, treaties, and treaty rights through our own economy and implementing them in every sector, but under, and Paul Martin said, how are you going to do it? I said, we're going to pass our own Trade and Commerce Act, occupying the field, recognizing our own economy. That includes commerce, he said. I said, you're damn right it includes commerce. It's right there in the corner. Look at it. I said, because that's the area that you've made laws and policies to restrict us and bar us out of the economy of Canada. And that's going to stop. It's going to stop under our jurisdiction law, and it's going to be portable by community, regionally, nationally, internationally. And we're going to implement the J Treaty. as well. So again, you see, where is our own economy? We're so busy trying to buy into their systems of getting the non-Indians to accept us in their business and their strategies for the economy. Well, after 500 years, they haven't included us, so I don't see them doing it any quicker. But what are we doing to implement our own economy? Nothing. Yet we're damn big business in terms of the financing that goes to the provinces and to the feds. Take the health sector. Major business opportunities. 10 years ago, we were consuming meds around 385 million worth of drugs, medicines from Manitoba to BC. Where's our own wholesale distribution center for pharmaceuticals? We can't even come together logistically and mutually to understand that we need those types of major economic business opportunities linked to our own drugstores, linked to our clinics with some capacity to apply and provide medication. Now the high-tech industry, that's huge. So I was working for 2 years with 9 cabinet ministers, the Prime Minister's office, and Privy Council. And Tara, who was in charge of the operations at Privy Council, said to me before Christmas, before she left the office, a new guy took over, but I'm still in touch with them. She says, what are we going to do about the economy and during the pandemic and after the pandemic? And that's what the former finance minister was asking. And that's what the Prime Minister keeps asking. So the documentation I gave to them was identifying what the alternatives are today and what the alternatives are for after the pandemic. So I gave them the charts and documentation. And I asked at the same time that they increase the budget for the Indigenous budget from Crown Indigenous Services from 11 billion to 17 billion. The Minister of Finance responded in 2 days. He said, yes, we'll do it. So when the new minister took over, Tara from Privy Council called me. She said, you got that in writing, that commitment that the former finance minister made? I said, yes. She sent it to me. She said, I'm going to make sure that the new finance minister keeps that commitment. So she did. She committed 18 billion instead of 17 billion. But I also asked for the pandemic money to be over and above that. And they've done that as well. The other thing that they were doing is they were looking at putting in place $180 billion over 10 years for the Canadian economy. And they left us out. So I said, we need 100 billion. So they decided to include us in the 180 billion, but they want the plans and strategies on how to do it. I said, well, I gave you the structure and the process for implementing our economy. And I said, but Tara, I said, there's an industry that's not affected at all in terms of negative impacts. It's all positive, constructive, productive impacts. It's called the high-tech industry. Today, it's $26 billion industry, going to go to 76 billion in 5 years. Tara, you and I have been communicating through this high-tech system for over 2 years now. I said, just imagine everybody across Canada doing the same thing, but not just in Canada, internationally. So that damn business is growing pretty rapidly. So the prediction for it to go to 76 billion in 5 years, that'll be achieved within 3 years. And that's what's happening today, you see, just in that industry alone. But again, where in the hell are we? What are we doing about training in that whole field so that we can take a opportunity of the big business and employment that's there? And I'm working on setting up a whole major multi-purpose cloud data center that will be linked right to the communities because they need multi-purpose data centers. The government federally wants you to collect data for education, health, and social development only. I said, like hell, we need data for every area. And if we're going to do proper financing, we need to know what form of the criteria is for collecting the data. We're still using federal provincial criteria for collecting data and information. That's not good enough. We need to design and develop our own, especially if we're going to do budgeting for those programs and services by sector. Along with the program standards that have to be legislated under our own jurisdiction law, we don't have the laws governing our program standards under our own government jurisdiction law that implement inherent rights and treaty rights in every program in every sector. So when we look at that whole process then of the economy, it's huge. But again, like I said, we're damn big money. So where are we? Child welfare, still having problems with provinces accepting the new legislation passed federally. But never mind, they never even accepted the Jordan's principle. Now that's violating constitutional obligations. But are we doing anything? No. They're still taking our children. Why? Now we have the opportunity to occupy the field with our own child welfare law and traditional parenting. Yeah, a lot of people are doing it, but they're buying in under the Section 92 provision that provides for the province to delegate authority to them. What the hell for? Under 9124 of the BNA Act, the provinces have no jurisdiction to legislate for Indians on or off reserve. But here we are now applying it ourselves. Why? You see, we're implementing the 69 white paper and 1980 buffalo jump that we opposed nationally and internationally. But now we're implementing them. So then you look at the political relations, treaty relations, judicial relations, economic relations. What about the fiscal relations that are recognized by that framework? And I gave you examples of what's there now. Section 35, applying to every federal department and ministry for us to access funding from. Are we doing it? No, we're not doing it. We're still stuck with Crown Indigenous services and the limited money that's implementing our poverty. And we're not even setting up our own departments. I laughed at Tara from Privy Council. She says, Sol, he said, we got a problem here. He said, how do we transfer billions of dollars to First Nations? He said, you want billions. I said, yes, Tara, what's your problem? I told you 35 years ago, your federal government started talking about funding in the billions. Here we are in 2021, Tara. I said, this was before Christmas. I said, you still want us to talk in the millions? Like hell, we're going to talk in the billions. Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Thought I lost you for a second.
Okay. So when I told her I lost you on the screen.
Oh.
There's nothing on the screen.
Oh, that's weird. Well, I can see you perfectly. Everybody else can too.
I can't see you at all. It's just a black screen. But anyway, and I told Tara, I said, transferring billions, I said, that's simple. She said, Sol, we agree with you in terms of looking at billions that the Indigenous nations need now, today. Said, we've got no problem with that. But how do we transfer it? She said. I said, Tara, that's simple. Let's examine what you do. I said, I think you got what you call departments of finance and revenue, eh? And your Department of Revenue collects all the revenue, including the transfer of the billions that goes from the feds to the provinces. Yes, he said. And your Department of Finance accounts for it. They audit it and they report on it and they distribute it. But I said, Tara, both you and I have a problem. She said, what's that? Well, it's 2021 and we still don't have departments of finance and revenue. She says, what? I said, yeah, We don't have departments of finance and revenue. She said, oh my God, she says, I didn't know that. Now you see how far behind we are in terms of implementing our fiscal relations and financing. And she said, well, we need to get them in place, she said, because if we're going to be transferring billions, it's going to have to be through their departments of finance and revenue. I said, yes, you have them at every level of your governments, but we have none. And in fact, we don't have departments in any sector, I told her, that's lawfully and politically recognized for implementation and enforcement. Oh boy, she said, there's lots of work to be done. I said, yes, but we need the money to do it. That's why I'm saying we have to move to the billions in our discussions and our budgeting processes. And she, yes, he said, yes, we agree here at Privy Council. So that process, and I stopped doing it just before New Year's, but nobody's following it up. So you see, our leadership have to get to Privy Council. Why? Because that's the next office to the PMO, but they're very powerful. Anything to do with financing and fiscal relations has to go through Privy Council. Any new laws and policies have to go through Privy Council. Any restructuring of government has to go through Privy Council. On and on it goes. So if you don't have direct access to Privy Council to work with their cabinet committees that they have there, there's nothing going to be changing in terms of the political agenda I'm talking about. Yes, they'll make administrative changes by the deputies and the ministers and ADMs, but nothing major. So then you go on to look at the international relations. Well, I can't give you much more information about how we implement international strategies under our government jurisdiction laws. But are we doing it? No, we're not doing it. So that gives you the comprehensive legal political framework governing Crown Indian nations relations. Now I'm going to highlight for you what is called the Code of Silence in terms of the Empire colonial policies and Canadian colonial policies. What are they? Most people know about the doctrine of discovery, but their knowledge is pretty limited. So when the empires of England, Spain, France, and Portugal divided up the world, England had North America, Australia, New Zealand, and parts of India. And Portugal and France had Africa. Spain had South Central America. So after they were done exploring, they called it, they were in possession of illegal possession of our lands and resources, and they knew it. So they discussed what they had to do to make it valid. So what they'd done to make it valid is they went to see the Pope of the Catholic Church. So what did the Pope do? Again, a code of silence. Most people don't know about the papal bull of 1493. What does it say? It says Indigenous people are not human nor Christian. Because they're not human, they don't have sovereignty and government. Because they're not human, they don't have title to lands and resources. Because they're not human, they don't have rights. Now, aren't those the same issues that we're still battling today, that were issued through Christian law, because they implemented them through Christian law, adopted by the governments of the empires for implementation worldwide? And they're impacting on us through the current systems today. Now, what are we doing about getting that papal bull terminated? I said if the Pope's going to apologize, that's okay, but that does nothing. He has to terminate that papal bull of 1493. UN rejected the doctrine of discovery the world churches have. I told them, you've done nothing if you haven't terminated the papal bull of 1493. All that still applies today. And some of them said, oh, no, it all died in the 17th century. But before I go into the 17th century one, it'll take us to the 18th century. But again, another issue that is a code of silence. How many of you know about the law of dominance? Now you see, what is the law of dominance? The law of dominance made it legal to kill indigenous peoples. That's why you saw the slaughter of those explorers of our people in the millions, hundreds of millions internationally. But that's never discussed, never addressed. But they're still killing our women and young girls and men and boys today. Now, when you go on to the 18th century, then what did the empires do to continue with the papal bull of 1493 and the doctrine of discovery? They implemented what you call the 1830 detribalization policies. Again, part of the code of silence. What were the objectives? You'll recognize them today. Civilization and Christianization to make us like them. Integration, assimilation, and liquidation. Those are the objectives of the 1830 detribalization policies based on the doctrine of discovery and the papal bull of 1493. And of course, there's other papal bulls that apply as well, but this one is the critical one. So when we go down to implement the 1830 detribalization policies, what did they do? First thing they done is they developed laws and policy outlaw our sovereignty of our nations by rejecting the recognition of our government, jurisdiction, and laws. And then they tackled the institutions of our societies and our governing systems and terminated our lodges, outlawed our lodges, outlawed our traditional practices with our ceremonies and so on. You know all that, but that was done by law. And then came the issue of language, culture, and spiritual practices, all outlawed again. Now, I could go on with you about what was outlawed and under their laws and jurisdiction, but they terminated nothing. Like I told you earlier, how we have the inherent rights, inherent sovereignty, inherent title granted to our nation and peoples by the Creator. They have no say over those whatsoever. If they're going to be terminated, they'll be terminated by ourselves, not them. In whatever form they want to choose, those will always exist. Same with our treaties now, they're international treaties. And by the way, when the UN examined Treaty 6, they said, we want to do something else. We want to examine how the treaties were breached. Treaty 6 was breached. So what did they do? They examined the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement of 1930, and they declared it illegal because there was no representation from the First Nations that they signed international treaties with. But here we are in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, still accommodating that document. Now, it's not just an act. That was an amendment to the BNA Constitution of Canada back then. But here we are still accommodating it. And anything I've had to say about it, nobody listens. So we're still going to be struggling with that. But again, you see, we need our own traditional contemporary Title to Lands and Resources Act. So moving forward then, you see, that's some of the homework we have to do. But moving on then from the 1830 detribalization policies of the empires, implemented under their jurisdiction laws through the English common law system. Now, the English common law system doesn't only apply to Canada, it applies to USA and Australia and New Zealand, parts of India today, yet. But when we talk about the process then of implementation of colonial policies in Canada, again, part of the code of silence. How many know about the 1947 plan to liquidate Canada's Indian provinces in 25 years? How to terminate the special rights and status of Indians was one of the objectives. The other one was to terminate the international treaties they made with us to be reduced to lands to be reduced to federal municipal status, and implementing corporate entities by band, tribal councils, treaty areas, and organizations. And then they started the transfer in 47 to transfer responsibility for Indians from the federal government to provincial governments. And that's what they're doing today in education, in health, in social development, child welfare, you name it. So that's the 1947 liquidation plan. So comes a 69 white paper, more specific about how to terminate the special rights and status of Indians by amending existing laws or constructing new law. So I gave you two examples: the Land Management Act, terminating our sovereignty, remaining intact in the title to our lands and resources under inherent rights and the treaties, but also terminating the special status of our people, Bill C-31, a major termination of families, not just individuals. So I could go on with the type of laws they've made now to terminate the special rights and status of Indians. And what are we doing? We're buying into them. What the hell for, when we have our own jurisdiction laws to be applied? So when we move ahead then in terms of the implementation, the 74-76 native policy to hire Indians and Métis and Inuit in the front lines. Oh, there you are, you're back on the screen here. Now, they were hired to implement these policies I'm talking about. So some are ADMs and even deputies today in government, but there are people. So then you look at another document that's part of the Code of Silence. How many know about the 1830, the 1980 Buffalo Jump? Now the 69 white paper was a liberal Trudeau paper. The 1980 Buffalo Jump is a Mulroney conservative paper. And the conservatives say, oh, we don't have genocide policies. Well, what the hell is a Buffalo Jump? And we're hurting ourselves into that Buffalo Jump by what we're doing, especially by implementing provincial law and jurisdiction. It has nothing to do with the recognition of all I've talked about in terms of our inherent rights, our inherent title, and our treaties and treaty rights. So I've given you now 500 years of history in about 20 minutes. Sometimes I only have 10 minutes, but sometimes I have 2 hours. So you can go into a lot of detail in 2 hours, but that gives you the comprehensive picture of what impacts on us collectively. And that's the political agenda I keep talking about that's not being implemented at all. It's not even understood by many of our leaders today and our senior officials. A lot of the resistance I'm talking about is coming from our senior middle management officials that are supposed to be working for us, but they're busy applying those policies and those provincial laws and jurisdiction. Go ahead.
I have a question from Kevin Morin, and he says, it seems like we've lost our traditional knowledge in terms of how we carry our nations like we used to.
Oh, big time. Big time. They haven't taken the time to learn it and know what it's all about. Because like I said, the clan system and the highly structured disciplined societies we had was a democratic system of governing. And where did the non-Indians learn democratic systems of governing from? From us. They never had a democratic system of government. They had a dictatorship, a Christian dictatorship or any other form of dictatorship, but they never had democratic systems of governing by the people. So yeah, we lost our way and we got to find a way back.
So I guess there's another question of, well, here at Standing Bear Network, we're trying to put together the, educational tools for our grassroots communities so they can, come up with their with these models, self-determination ideas, and we were wondering if you have documents of your, you know, and graphs or structures that can be used. This was actually a question that was asked. Educational material that can be disseminated, and also what type of you know, what can we do? And you know, I had discussed a little bit with Russ Dybo and Roland Panguish about you know, like where the Indigenous Bar Association is, and it seems like there's some silence there. And I mean, of course, they, you know, they pledge themselves to the Queen, I guess, and you know, do we have any impartial legal counsel that's helping to inform our people, or do we, you know, where is our leadership and direction coming from? I think it's coming from right here. Myself, having so many wonderful people that have been engaged in this for so long, but what I see is I see our communities are there's a lack of political will. And I think much of it is unintended by way of you know, impoverishment and you know, all the things that we see going on in our communities, particularly in our rural communities. How do we engage people that are in a lull of despair?
Well, what I'm doing myself is, when we started Indian Control in 1972 at home, set up the first Indian Control School in Canada, we examined the status that was there. And the province was running Indian education right on reserves, even in the north. And they were graduating one high school student a year from the whole province of Saskatchewan. And then we looked at the employment. Only 5 Indians employed in education across Saskatchewan, 6 Indians in university and teachers' college. That's all there was in 72. And our grandparents and aunts and uncles and mums and dads said, enough is enough here. We've been integrated for 15 years and we've only graduated one partial grade 12 student. What the hell are we doing? Let's take control. So we did. And of course, like I told you, we got cut off 3 times in 1 year from Indian Affairs funding that we didn't need anyway, but it would have helped. Anyway, when we set it up, if we had stopped doing what we were doing, because I introduced a degree program for teacher ed and social work right on the reserve in our school. And a mother and daughter graduated with their degree in social work at the same time. Now, the university's presidents from Regina and Saskatoon sent out a messenger. He said, "Chief, I'm here to tell you they're not going to certify your training." I said, "Fine with me. They haven't graduated any of my people anyway. We'll do it myself." That's what we did. Now, those are now national, international programs implemented by universities. But the content of their education and training was changed drastically, because those teachers were to be graduating with knowledge of our whole traditional education system and the contemporary education system, with our own curriculum intact for implementation, enforcement, stuff like that. But nevertheless, you see, if we had stopped doing what we were doing, you wouldn't see the 16,000 Indians employed in education just in Saskatchewan alone today. The other thing we saw was we were losing our schools on reserves. There was hardly any schools on the reserves. So when I went to negotiate for my school, I had an hour and 15 minutes with Chrétien way back then. And I walked into the NIB office back then, and there were some chiefs there from the Maritimes and Alberta and Manitoba, Saskatchewan. I said, "What are you guys doing here?" They said, "Oh, we're trying to get a meeting with the Minister of Indian Affairs. We want our schools." Oh, I said, "What's happening?" "Nothing." They said, "We got no response at all." Well, I said, "I have an hour and 15 minutes with him." I said, "Come with me." And I tried to phone just hang on a minute.
Sure.
I'll call you right back. I'm on a Zoom call. Pardon? Yeah. What time? Okay, good. Yeah, do that. Okay, bye. Yeah, that's Treaty 2. They want a Zoom call at 4 o'clock. But anyway, getting back to the Chrétien story. I phoned his office. The good leaf was his assistant, and he didn't answer. So I took all the chiefs over anyway, and had a pretty good delegation of my own. And Chrétien had his office right across from where you enter into the parliament for the sittings of the MPs. There was a big office. So we occupied it. People had to even sit on the floor. There were so many of us. And Chrétien came in and he was stomping over the people. And as he was going over to his desk, he said, "Sanderson, you bastard, Sanderson, you bastard." He kept saying. So he just sat on his desk. He didn't go behind it. I said, "Minister, there's no need to get upset today." I said, "But these chiefs wanted to meet with you, and your staff wouldn't arrange a meeting with you. And they're here for the same reason that I set up this meeting for us. We want our school." So I told them we'll have 5 minutes each, and they'll tell you what they want, and we'll leave you 15 minutes to say yes. So we done it. Each chief took their 5 minutes and asked for their school. I did, and we left it up to the minister. But he was so angry, not at us, but at his staff. And he told them, "I am very angry at my staff." He said, "There's no reason for them not allowing you to meet with me. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm the minister." He says. So he went on to say, "Yes, we'll follow it up. We'll get arrangements made to get to your school." So you see, that kind of politics that's at play. And our people get stymied because they don't have access. Well, the reason I had access like that is because I was also in the National Liberal Executive. So I had access to the Prime Minister and the total executive, the cabinet, and so on. But I was given a choice. The elders called me in and they said, "You're going to be chief of FSIN or you're going to be a liberal." I said, "I'll stay as a chief of FSIN." But anyway, when you look at that whole process, you see, if we can do that in education, and you look now at all the nice schools that are on reserves, and if we had continued to build the schools in urban centers and rural areas in the country with our capital money, you wouldn't see those nice schools on our reserves today if we didn't do what we done in 1972 at home, you see.
Right.
And the Federated College that we have here built in Regina, Doug Cardinal designed that as our school in 1972. So when he got the contract to build the Federated College here in Regina, he called to see if he could use those documents. I said, "Yeah." I said, "You're the drafter. Go ahead." So that's a symbol of a vision that was had in 1972. But you see, if we can do that in education, what the hell's stopping us from doing it in every sector? There should be no unemployment. The other thing I'm pushing for now is a guaranteed annual income. When I was chief at home, I set up an economic subsidy and for families and individuals. And Katrina from Privy Council took over from the previous Secretary to Cabinet and in Privy Council. He said, "You've done something when you were a chief with social assistance." He said, I'm told it was very constructive and productive. Before we meet, I want you to tell me what you did." So I said, "It was very simple." I said, "I took that social assistance allocation you gave me, which was over half the funding that I needed. But I took that and I took the unemployment money and I created an economic subsidy." She said, "What's an economic subsidy?" Well, everybody needs utilities. Everybody needs rent or mortgage. Everybody needs food. Everybody needs transportation. And if they're working, they need childcare. That's the economic subsidy. And that has stayed in place. Some of the adults went back to the teacher training and social work training. That stayed in place till they were done. in addition to their education allowance. If they went and got a job, I said, I didn't cut them off anything. That stayed in place till they made enough money at their work to cover those kinds of costs. So that was an economic subsidy. OSC says we certainly have to do something like that because it's a hell of a mess right now. Social assistance is a hell of a mess right from my office to the community level. I told her I know. I've heard about it. But she says, yeah, that's a kind of a form of an income security, isn't it? Annual income security. I said, yes. Well, she said, we have to go there too. I said, well, in the documentation I've given to the 9 cabinet ministers, the Prime Minister's office and Privy Council, calls for a guaranteed annual income as part of that social safety net that we're structuring. If you don't do it for yourselves, we're going to do it for ourselves. I said, we have to do it because that's a positive investment in the economy rather than this negative investment of social assistance. So she agreed that they have to do something like that. As you know, Spain now has adopted the guaranteed annual income for everybody. London sent out their MPs to their constituencies to see what they'd get from a response. Every constituency, 100% agreed to a guaranteed annual income. So 2 other countries are looking at it. And as far as I know, the Liberal caucus is interested in following it up with a policy conference as a Liberal policy conference. But we have to do something like that if we want to improve the economy, because that'll benefit the economy by community, by region, and nationally. Be a positive investment in the economy. Plus, it would stabilize our homes and our families with a guarantee of funding that would cover their cost of living. Now, there are just some examples of what I'm doing to get implementation done. And your comments about the leadership and what's not being done, a lot of them know what they want to do. What's missing is the how. How do you do it? So I've been to several communities, including 2 in northern Alberta, and that's where they're struggling. Now, Treaty 2 that just called me for a Zoom call at 4 o'clock, I'm working with them on the how, and they've got major plans for implementation. And I've been meeting with them now on the how to implement and do it. Treaty 8, the same thing. I'm from Treaty 6, and I haven't heard from anybody in Treaty 6.
I have a question from Treaty 3 territory. They say there's an upcoming provincial election in Ontario. How do Indigenous treaty nations participate best to favor the treaty relationship? Is it even worth it to vote in the election? Asking from Treaty 3 territory. Yeah.
Okay, I done some work with northern part of Ontario in Treaty 9. And what I told them a while back is, look, Ontario government was part of your treaty making process here in Ontario when you made treaties with the feds and the Crown and Right of England. I said, it would be worthwhile conducting a research on what their records are, what kind of records they kept and made during that treaty making process. So I got a call here about 5-6 months ago. That research has been done. And they're just amazed at the difference of the content of the notes taken by the province and the notes taken by the feds on the making of Treaty 9. So you can understand why they're having problems, but it'll be interesting to see those documents. But that's the problem in Ontario, is that Ontario is part of their treaty making process, supposed to be just as an observer, but obviously had a different status, more than just being an observer. They influenced even the writing of the treaty. So there's much homework to be done in that whole area alone in Ontario. But keep in mind, Treaty 3 has the national powers of treaty making, and they need to continue to make their own laws, implementing not just their treaty rights and treaties, but their inherent sovereignty of their government and their inherent rights by sector and inherent rights to the ownership of their lands and resources and waters. And that's what we're not doing collectively. Because all those things that I've highlighted, everything I've highlighted impacts on every nation in the same way. But when we come together, we don't even get to the table to discuss it. Now, like I said, what's missing, a big time of what's missing is the how. And like you said, we got our own people that know the how. Eh? They know how to get these things done, but we're not even using them. So yes, some of our lawyers are not there in terms of feeling comfortable to implement our own inherent legal system, but we have a few that are prepared to do it. So like I said, when we started Indian Control of Education in '72, we done it alone for 2 years. And after the third year, we were joined by 7 bands, including Saddle Lake, Alberta. And that grew steady year after year. So you see what's happened. But somewhere along the way, we gave up our jurisdiction for education to be able to get access to the additional money they provided federally for the setting up those education districts. Well, you could get the same money setting up your own education district. Part 2 of your Education Act would establish your own education district under your own laws and jurisdiction. And if you needed regional, national, international authorities, well, Part 3 could do that under your own laws and jurisdiction. So why aren't we doing it?
Right.
That's
when I think about the education system, a lot of people are getting hit with they feel like, oh my God, look at this avalanche of political problems that we're having with respect to the new developments, particularly over the past 6 years with the new Liberal government. What are we doing? Are we putting together curriculums that implement this framework that you're talking about? So people don't get slammed with it in adulthood. Are there curriculums that are being formed or have been formed, or maybe there are models that other people are using that incorporate traditional knowledge as well as traditional forms of governance and its implications, with the federal and provincial governments?
Yes, Treaty 2 has gone a long ways in that whole field to the point of certification.
Really?
Of their own curriculum. And they've set up a governing body called their traditional knowledge keepers as having that authority to certify their own curriculum, their own teachers and their own institutions.
I see.
And some younger people with academic training is part of that certification process. So yes, it's being done, and Treaty 8 is looking at moving ahead. Treaty 2 is also looking at their own university, and Treaty 8 is as well. So we met with Treaty 2 here at the First Nations University last 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And they're going to bring a delegation over to see how we can work together. And that's where I was saying we need to form a coalition of our own universities, so that we can move ahead with what you're talking about, of what we have to do, but examine the how. The how do we structure that whole system of governing institutions for certification, and just the quality of education in terms of laws we make governing program standards in education, both traditionally and contemporary.
Yeah, I was at the Treaty 2 Summit back in 2018. I met a lot of good people there. Yeah, I kind of lost track of exactly what was in progress. But for those of you who are watching, our Treaty 2 family, good people to connect with respect to progress that's being made on an educational level. Are there other things that you could, are there specific areas of, where people seem to really be excelling, that people can tap into? Maybe where one community is weak in this area, maybe another community has more strengths over here.
Yeah, there's different different areas that we can examine. Like I was involved in heading up the Bear Claw Casino here in Saskatchewan that got raided by the RCMP. But in setting it up, the feds had amended the criminal code not to delegate gaming to the provinces. There was a criminal code amendment to recognize the provincial jurisdiction for gaming within their boundaries. Now, in that legislation, they also identified the provinces having control over all electronics for gaming. That included the slot machines. So I told them, look, you forgot that provincial government has no jurisdiction on reserves. Even though this is a criminal code amendment, they still have no jurisdiction on reserves. So what we did at White Bear, working with former Chief Brian Standing Ready and Chief Shepherd, put a team together that I worked with, me and my wife, and Carl Roberts, the late Carl Roberts from Rosa River was also on the team along with Hilda from there. And we put together our own Trade and Commerce Act, occupying the field for control and ownership of the economy. And then when we done that, we signed a trade agreement, import agreement with one of the tribes across the border to import the slot machines. And we took our laws and agreement to the Customs Canada in Winnipeg. The lady said, give me a few minutes. So she was back in 20 minutes. She said, there, she said, everything's in order. And we sent the trade agreement and your laws to Customs. Bring your slot machines across. So we had the semi pull up to the Customs, and the RCMP were there to have them stop us. And they said, no, they got all their jurisdictional laws in place. They're entitled to those slot machines. So we brought them in and we set up our casino. ran for 2 weeks and we got raided. But if I was there, they wouldn't have been raiding it. They'd have been securing it. Because under the criminal code, we have the jurisdiction for trespass law. And our people don't even know that. Right. Yeah. So that's how we got the gaming going. So we have 7 casinos now, and we grossed before the pandemic just under 300 million. And 80 million is distributed to the First Nations communities and some to urban centers for various developments. But we provide 20 million to the province. And that's for overseeing the operations. But we have SIGA that does that now. And it's got a lot of years of experience, so we'll be taking total control. And I've been working on the amendment to the criminal code recognizing our jurisdiction. Every federal minister of justice has agreed to it, but we haven't. Why? Again, why? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, you might be. I was told, oh, Sol, you're going to create addictions to gaming. I know what the hell you're talking about. You're all addicted in one way or the other. It might not be gaming, but you're all addicted. I said, look at your own addictions. I said, besides, I said, all that damn money is flowing out of Canada, going to the US. And I worked with the tribal casinos in the US as well, and organizing theirs. I said, why can't we keep the damn money at home and put it to work in our communities and with our people? So that's what it's doing. Now we're going to go to internet gaming. And I asked a fellow that I worked with in justice for years. He was retiring about 3 years ago. He calls me. He said, Sol, he said, I need to talk to you. Excuse me. He says, yeah, I said, I know what it is. He says, you forgot that you had to deal with international gaming. And you gave up the gaming to the provinces, but the provinces have no jurisdiction for international gaming. But we have. He said, yes, we have to get back into it through you, through your gaming strategies, he said. But he said, I'm leaving soon. He said, and I don't know if it'll get done, but that's the only way we can get back into international gaming. is through your strategy and your jurisdiction. You see? See what we don't do?
I do. So I want to thank you so much for helping us to navigate these complexities so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think that could be where some people feel overwhelmed because they haven't been engaged, you know, at the level that you have and many others. You know, the information, first, it's a joy to just spend time with you. I feel like I know you because I've been watching you a lot over the past couple of years. I'm happy to be able to disseminate this by way of Standing Bear Network. You know, we have a lot of people watching now, and you know, we're earmarked to reach about 15 million people this year, and we're getting good responses with respect to our educational segments on Decolonizing Canada, Life Over Lithium, People of Red Mountain, and feel free, you guys, you know, just check out our educational segments. Yeah, do you want to wrap it up? Do you have maybe words you want to give to the grassroots? Or
well, one of the things, excuse me, one of the things you got to be mindful of is everything that I just gave you information on. Don't be afraid to take that to the communities. Because my wife and I, years ago, were told, oh, that's university education and information. The members in the community wouldn't understand it. I said, like hell, they'll understand it. And that's our findings. They understand it, but they can add to it as well. So don't be afraid to take all that information that I just gave you right to the communities, to the people, because that's what they need to know. And more importantly, the how is how they can move forward collectively with their duties and responsibilities that are associated with the inherent rights I talk about, and the treaties and treaty rights, the collective responsibilities as members of the community, having the powers for governing. And they need to be reminded they have duties and responsibilities for all those special rights and status that they have. And if they don't exercise it properly, yes, it's going to go away. And none of the generations will enjoy what we have been able to enjoy up to now. So the other thing for your information, everything that I've done is on my own with my family members, and I have no money to work with. So what I've been doing is putting a price to the charts and the information that I have, and they're for sale in order to get some money back to carry on with the work.
I understand.
And their categories, $5,000, $10,000, and for all of them, it's 15,000. So, amen.
Amen. And I think keeping in line with your philosophy, as always, all of our educational segments here on Standing Bear Network are free for download and distribution. Indeed, we encourage it. This has been a real honor, a real blessing. You know, we don't learn everything in one shot, so it's not going to be one thing, a big thing. This is going to be progressive. Anxious to see what's going on in Treaty 2 territory, and certainly send my love out to them.
Yeah.
John Gonzalez sends my love out to my Treaty 2 family.
Yeah.
I hope to get up there soon.
Yeah. Just one more thing.
Yeah.
Copyrights.
Yeah.
No, I was with the Navajo Nation, and Leon Secretero, they called them their Einstein. They had a forum down there with North American elders on environment and environmental change, and air and water and resources. And when they were done, they wanted him to identify somebody that would work on securing the information and data that we have to share. And so we were meeting at his house, and he was talking about all this. And one of the ladies with us said, "And who do you want to do that?" He said, "Sol Sanderson." He says, I said, "Okay, you want me to do it? How do you want me to do it?" He said, "Well, it's pretty straightforward," he said, "but it's a strange concept to non-Indians." He says, "Because everything in your head is ours. Everything in our heads is yours. Nobody owns intellectual property. It's granted to us by the Creator, and we are allowed to share it. And yes, we have ownership in terms of the use and of it and the possession of it, but we don't really have outright ownership to intellectual property." Then I got home to Canada, and there was an international forum of elders on the same thing at Six Nations. And my phone rang on a Sunday afternoon about 3 o'clock. And Chief Sundown was the chief at Big Island Lake then. He was on the phone. He said, "Sol, I got a committee of elders with me, and we're assigned to call you and talk to you." "About what?" I said. "About our intellectual property, how we're going to protect it." And he was hardly finished, and then one of the elders spoke up. He says, "And here's how you do it." He says, "Everything you have in your head is ours. Everything we have in our heads is yours." Same advice I just got from the US side of the border. So we need to work on it. And Wilton Littlechild's firm was working on legislation that could protect our intellectual property. But again, you see, that's a collective responsibility we have, because they're abusing and making big money off our intellectual property. Like on the Medicine Chest Task Force, when I met with the international organizations on health, they said, "We need a home." They said, "If we're gone, our organization is gone internationally." And there were several of them, different ones. They said, "We'd like you to set up a International College of Health and Science at FNUC. And because you're doing what you're doing, and the majority of the information we need on traditional medicines and health," they said, "it still exists in Canada. So we need to do something now." And they said that they'd be prepared to link up with whatever we're able to do to set up a International College of Health and Science. But you see, we need those types of institutions in place to carry on with what we have to do. And they said, in our work, 85% of the medicines, contemporary medicines today, are founded based on our traditional knowledge of medicines. All they do is add some chemicals here and there, and they commercialize it.
Right.
So that's the type of stuff that they're talking about in terms of our intellectual property being abused. And how many universities send out people that are doing their doctorate degrees and so on, and they write their theses and they get full credit for everything they got from our knowledge.
Right.
And they claim ownership of it. Like that's.
Yeah. Well, we are learning. I'm learning. Our community, that we have a lot of people here just saying thank you, for sharing all this wisdom and knowledge with us. I'm so glad we connected, and I look forward to connecting in the future, and maybe giving you occasional progress reports on what's going on with communities that are being impacted by these important things that we need to understand and implement.
Yes, there's a pretty broad field.
It's broad.
But what I don't want you to do is prioritize any sector over the other sector. Our
Right.
people have to learn how to move forward in a broad-based agenda. So
Well, I think I went to school for like 6 years, and yeah, I went to university at Concordia College, and I even went to seminary for a number of years. And then when I got married and got a little older, I thought to myself, what am I going to do with all this useless information in my head? And so Um, I've not learned so much, over the past even year, I would say, than I learned during the entire time I sat in the halls of academia. Uh, so this is I think that says something for academia today, and I think that we have to raise the bar for ourselves. Within our own community, these are important things, and if they grab you, run with it. Yeah, so thank you so much, Sol.
Yeah, you're welcome. And just keep in touch.
Hi. Many
Okay.
blessings, you guys. Be sure to share this out to your groups, and keep us all posted. Thank you.
Oh, the other thing, by those documents I'm talking about and those charts that I have for sale,
Yes.
once you get them, they're yours to share.
Oh,
yeah.
you hear that, everybody? You hear that, Kevin? All my grassroots communities out there.
Yeah, they're there for yours to share.
And I understand it's difficult because, I mean, we're not making a windfall over here. All of our editors are volunteers, and oftentimes when initiatives like this happen, yeah, I mean, it's hard. Funding can be hard. Any type of funding and transportation and things that you need to do to communicate with people in an impactful way. So I'm glad that some type of revenue is going to be generated to help your efforts and ability to live.
Well, those resource documents can be used right in your governing systems and in your schools. But just a quick note about your university education. Last trip to Northern Alberta, I stopped in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And a group of people wanted to meet with me. And one of them had 3 degrees. 2 of them had 2 degrees.
Yeah.
And one of them was an expert in international law and policy.
Oh.
So when I was done, they all said, "Thank you very much." The one in the 3 degrees, he said, "I've been trained in university, I have 3 degrees, but I've never heard nothing of what you just told us."
Right.
He said,
right.
I learned a hell of a lot in an hour and a half. He said, "Never heard it once during the time I spent in university." And the rest of them said the same. But the guy that was the expert in international law, he said, I gotta change my thinking very drastically. He says, yeah.
That's the irony of life. It's like I've never worked so hard since I've been unemployed. And I've never learned so much, outside of academia.
Yeah.
That's the way it is, I guess.
A little come.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, everybody, even the Privy Council, they said, "We've gone over your documents 5 times." They said, "Every time we go over them, we learn something new."
Exactly.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
You and your family.
Yep.
I hope.